Welcome back to Combat Mission Basics, where we're going to take a look at getting your vehicles where you want them. Vehicle movement is pretty straightforward, and while there are some similarities to infantry movement, there are also some key differences and a couple of commands that only vehicles have access to, including the frequently misunderstood but extremely useful hull down command. So we'll take a look at all that, at how terrain and ground conditions affect vehicle movement, and a little bit about how to move your vehicles around the battlefield without getting them all knocked out. As usual for these basics videos, although the footage here is from Combat Mission Black Sea, this is all game engine stuff, so it applies across all the Combat Mission titles. There are 5 pure movement commands for vehicles: fast, quick, move, slow and reverse, then 2 more specialised commands with tactical utility: hunt and hull down. These are all found in the movement orders tab in either the bottom right of the UI or the quick orders menu if you press spacebar. Fast, quick, move and slow generally conform to their infantry counterparts, and in the same way they represent different balances of speed and awareness, and speed and reaction to the enemy. Unlike infantry in Combat Mission though, armed vehicles can shoot on the move, so an additional factor to consider is that there is, generally speaking, another balancing act between speed and accuracy to consider. Fast is the vehicle's maximum speed on a given terrain type, but also involves minimum situational awareness and the least stable firing platform, whilst prioritising movement over reaction to incoming fire or spots. At the other end of the scale, slow is essentially walking speed, but the vehicle has the most situational awareness and the most stable firing platform it can without being stationary. Quick and move slot in between fast and slow, with the balance shifting according to the speed. It's pretty straightforward. The final simple movement command is reverse, which does exactly what it says on the tin: the vehicle moves backwards. The 2 specialised commands are a little bit more complicated, though hunt is functionally the same as it is for the infantry. Using hunt, a vehicle will advance at a relatively slow pace, scanning for the enemy. If it detects a target or comes under fire, the vehicle will stop and engage if it can. This might result in the vehicle stopping out in the open, or with its flank exposed, or in some other less than ideal situation. So while hunt certainly has its advantages, it's important to consider where your vehicle might stop and how vulnerable it might be. Hull down, on the other hand, is a little bit more complex. To begin with, the term itself refers to a vehicle's position relative to a slope. A hull down vehicle has its hull masked behind terrain with only the turret exposed. This way the vehicle presents the smallest target while still being able to engage with its turret weaponry. The tricky part is actually getting into a hull down position. It can be done manually by putting waypoints down and drawing a line of sight for them with the target command to see what locations that waypoint is hulled down to, but this requires a lot of trial and error and not a little experience to get right consistently, hence the introduction of a specific command. There are 2 ways to use hull down. The simplest way to do it is to set the hull down waypoint in the spot you want your vehicle to be hull down to. The vehicle will travel down the line of the order until it reaches a position where it's hull down to that spot. If for whatever reason the vehicle can't find a hull down position along its route, it will happily continue all the way to the waypoint, which may well not be what you want. This is why I personally prefer the second method of using hull down. This involves putting the waypoint down in the general area you want the vehicle to move to, then selecting it and using the target command to pick the spot you want to be hull down to, just as if you were area firing. Once it's got the command, the vehicle will move forward until it is hull down to that spot, or until it reaches the waypoint, whichever it gets to first. This way you can have a forward limit on how far the vehicle is going to move, and it feels a little bit safer than giving the TAC AI the option to go herring off across the map. That's all the commands out of the way, but there are a few things to bear in mind when using them. Firstly, and pretty obviously, vehicle movement is constrained by both the technical characteristics of the vehicle in question and how those characteristics interact with the terrain. So different vehicles with different weights and engines and methods of propulsion will travel at different speeds, even if they use the same movement command. Having some kind of handle on just how long it's going to take your vehicles to go where you want them to go is one way to help avoid disappointment. Different terrain types offer different levels of resistance to vehicle movement too. Some, like marsh or heavy rocks, are totally impassable. Some, like mud or light forest, may slow vehicles down, and others, like road or concrete, might offer no resistance whatsoever. The more difficult the terrain is, the more likely the vehicle is to get stuck, or bogged. Bogged vehicles cannot move. They automatically attempt to unbog themselves. If they succeed, then they carry on moving as normal. If they fail, then they become immobilized and they're stuck there for the duration of the game. The battle's ground conditions and weather, which you can check by clicking menu and then conditions, also have an effect, even on types of terrain that offer no obvious obstacles to vehicle movement. A patch of grass on a dry sunny day, for example, is not likely to cause any problems, but the same patch of grass with muddy ground conditions in the rain is something to watch out for, especially as the rain will cause the ground condition to worsen over time. In my experience, the speed of vehicles doesn't affect how likely they are to become bogged, but your mileage may vary on this. Overall, the potential for bogging means that ground condition and terrain types can have tactical implications. This is especially obvious in wet and muddy conditions. For example, if you have to make a choice between using an exposed but practical road and using a safe but boggy field. But it's also present when the ground is dry too, and faster vehicle movement can reveal your units by kicking up clouds of dust. In addition, most vehicles are capable of moving through some kinds of obstacles. It's not too difficult to see that an armoured car might be able to break through a fence, or that a tank might be able to knock down a wall. While obviously pretty useful, and usually a lot quicker and easier than having to find an existing gap, this is not consequence-free. Battering down fences and walls will degrade wheels or tracks, and vehicles that do it too much can quickly find themselves moving at reduced speed or even being immobilized. It's also obviously important to know what obstacles you can get through and what obstacles you can't. If the TAC AI can't break through an obstacle, it will try and go around it, with potentially fatal consequences. The second aspect of vehicle movement to bear in mind is that vehicles not only turn and corner in a similar way to their real-life counterparts, but their drivers will try and follow your orders to the letter. This can make some simple actions, such as cornering, require a little more care than they do with the infantry. For example, if we need to follow a bend in the road, ordering a vehicle to move to the corner and then turn 90 degrees to the right will instruct the TAC AI to do exactly that. It will move to the corner, stop, and then try and make the turn. It's a lot quicker and more efficient to break the corner up into a number of smaller turns and potentially reduce the speed so that the TAC AI takes it smoother. Finally, on the subject of quick and efficient movement, vehicles obviously cannot drive through each other. If one vehicle gets too close to another one, it will automatically pause. This makes traffic management important if you're trying to take advantage of roads. It's important to space your vehicles out enough or stagger their starts so that they don't concertina their way forward in a way that's going to end in disaster if the enemy spots them. Of course, in combat mission we don't only have to worry about getting from point A to point B on time without getting stuck. We also have to worry about the enemy trying to punch holes in our vehicles. The easiest way to avoid this is to not get noticed in the first place. It's always a good idea to keep something solid between you and the enemy, and there's nothing more solid than the ground itself. So moving behind hills, down valleys, and getting as much as possible out of little variations in the terrain is always worth doing. When it comes to actually fighting, it's never a good idea to expose more of your vehicles than you have to. This is what hull down positions are for, but it's also important to bear in mind that a small target is still a target, especially in the modern titles, and that even shots that don't penetrate can ruin your day by degrading subsystems. So hanging around in full view of the enemy, even if you're hull down, is something to avoid. It's much better to stay on standby in a hide position, roll forwards into hull down to engage the enemy, and then roll back once the job is done, preferably shifting position so your vehicle doesn't pop up in the same place twice. In a similar vein, if you have to move in full view of the enemy, it's best doing so in a way that minimises the risk. Keeping the enemy suppressed, popping smoke and moving as fast as possible are good means of reducing the chances that your vehicles get set on fire. There's a strong argument for only ever using the fast command to get from point A to point B. If you want to fight, you're probably better off stationary. If you want to move, you want to be as difficult to target as possible for as little time as possible, and that means maximum speed. Finally, worth bearing in mind is that the tech AI also has a say in what's going on. Vehicles that spot a threat may or may not react in different ways. They may turn to face it, they may pop smoke, usually by reversing away as fast as possible. That just about wraps up the basics of vehicle movement in Combat Mission. Hope you all found that useful, and I'll catch you in the next video.